So recently I've had a few questions from folks about assembling a crossbow with bow irons, and essentially the process of assembling the front end with the stirrup, the prod, the wedges, the anvils, and so on, and just getting that all together and getting it fit nice and snug. So it's not hugely complicated, but it can be a little bit fiddly. So I just wanted to give a short video to just show how all that works, and some sort of best practices with that too. So to start with, we're going to lay down the crossbow on a flat surface. I find it easiest to secure it down to the surface. This is just lightly clamped. It's not really twisted in hard. But that just gives a little bit of stability. Not necessary though. You can also pop it in a vise too, if you like. So the first thing that we're going to do is take the string off the prod, obviously, so that way you can slide the bow irons on and off. I'm going to disassemble this whole front assembly here so you can see how it comes apart, and then we'll just simply put it all back together again. So the first thing you want to do is pop out the wedges here. So you'll need a thin piece of metal or something to tap on with a hammer. I find an awl works really well, or a little drift like this, or really anything that's metal and solid to tap against there. And then just take a mallet or a hammer, just give it a few little taps, then again on the other side. And once they loosen, then it's pretty easy to just pop them out like that. And you can see the profile of the wedges is there's a flat bottom with a right angle on each one. And the way that they fit together best is you've got one upside down and they slide against each other like that. So when you put them back in, make sure that the flat bottom is towards the outside, rather towards the anvils that they're going to push against. So speaking of the anvils, that's these little objects here. And these essentially create a nice, tough, sort of low friction surface for the wedges to slide in against and push. And essentially what happens is as the wedges slide in, they push these things out. The front one pushes against the front of the slot there, and the back one pushes against the back of the iron, drawing the iron back and clamping the stirrup and the prod right back into the mouth of the tiller. So now that we've got the wedges out, this whole stirrup, irons, and prod assembly will just pop right out of the front of the tiller like so. And then you can just slide the prod out. There's a wooden wedge, which I'll show you in a minute how that works, and the bow irons, and finally the stirrup. Now, traditionally, stirrups were actually one continuous loop that was actually riveted together after the bow irons are put on. However, that can be a little bit tricky to deal with in terms of assembling everything together. So for my stirrups, I have them in two pieces like this. And you'll see that the profile here, they're slightly canted up, and that way it won't let them slide out once everything's clamped together with the bow irons. So, to put everything back together, you simply have to reverse the process that we just did. And again, I find it easiest to have the tiller secured down to a surface. Doesn't have to be clamped super hard, but just enough that it's nice and secure. So obviously the first thing you want to put on is the prod. Now this particular prod, and the one that comes with the Modern Armbruster medieval crossbow kit, is actually wood and fiberglass laminate. So you don't want to have the steel of the bow irons pressing directly against that, because you might damage the back of the bow. So what you can do is put in a piece of leather on the back of the bow. You can wrap it around, or in my case, what I've used is just a simple thin wooden wedge. This really can be any kind of wood that you like. The other purpose for these kind of wedges is if you find when you're popping the bow irons on, you slide them on the end. If you find that they're simply not tight enough, that you can't push the wedges in tight enough to tighten everything up, you can simply pad out the front with a thicker wedge. That brings the bow iron forward and then makes the gap here between the front of that slot and the back of that bow iron a little bit narrower, and that way it allows the wedges to really tighten it in a lot more. Conversely, if you find that it's too tight and you can barely get the wedges in at all, what you can do is either, if you're already using a wooden wedge, you can use a thinner wooden wedge, or if you're not already using a thin wedge, this front end of the slot here, you can simply use a chisel and chisel some of that material away, and that just will create a little bit more space between the two anvils to get those wedges in. So to proceed, we're going to slide both of the bow irons on. And also I should note here that the prod, I've put it on so that the flat side is facing up, because it's not symmetrical. There's a flat side and then the tapers taper up on the bottom side only. So make sure that the flat side of your prod is up. So making sure that it's nice and centered. Now I've got the bow irons on. Now the next thing I want to do is slide them forward just a little bit. And that way I've got some room at the front between the front of the bow iron and the back of the prod, so that I can get the stirrup in. And for that, we're just going to gently pull it apart and slide it in. And you'll see in the bow irons that come with the kit, there's a little bit notch. There's a little notch in the front of the bow iron, and that's where the stirrup sits when you're ready to clamp it all together. Finally, once we've got that in, just loosely in front, still again with a space between the stirrup and the back of the prod, we can now insert our wooden wedge. This one I've got a little bit angled. Doesn't have to be angled. So we're just going to slide that in so it's nicely centered. And again, you can see it can be a little bit fiddly to do. So I've got that slid in. Again, the wedge is between the prod and the stirrup. So I'm now drawing the bow irons gently back with my hand, just on the back of the bow iron here, and holding with just a little bit of tension so that they don't fall. I'm just going to gently move the stirrup up into that slot that I described. Just making sure it's right in on both sides. And now you can actually squeeze the stirrup in with that, with your left hand rather. Now you can see that the stirrup, or excuse me, the back of the bow iron is aligned with the slot for the wedges. So now we've got that done. All we need to do is slide in the anvils. I don't even know if that's what these are called, anvils or blocks, or I call them anvils because I think it sounds cool. So slide the anvils in. So that's the first one, and that's comfortably pushed right against the front of that slot. The second anvil, slide in. Now this time, instead of having that space in the anvil, it's going to face backwards, not forward, because that's going to keep it from sliding out as it clamps against the back of the bow irons. So wiggle that one through, and then using your hand, you can simply push that back against the back of the bow iron, so that's nice and comfortable. Comfortable is probably the wrong word. And sometimes you might find at the front end things are wiggling around a little bit. You can just sort of realign that and I can see I've marked my prod here, and I can see it's a little off center, so I'm just going to pull that back through a little bit. Make sure the wedge is in there. That looks pretty good. There we have it. Now you can see there's a space between the two anvils in which we can insert one of our wedges. So this is going to be the wedge that's towards the front. So note, that's the flat side there. I'm turning it around. The flat side is facing the anvil. So inserting it just a little bit. Same again on the other side, that flat side of the wedge facing the anvil. You're sliding that in. Now you can actually, just using some finger pressure, whoops, just get everything lined up and start squeezing it together with your hand as much as you can. All the while you're doing this, just keep checking that front end, make sure everything looks tight and centered and good. So now that that's hand tight, it'll hold on there while we get our hammer. I find it's best, actually, to use two hammers. Not so you're whacking at the same time, but you simply put one against one side, and that just creates a little bit of a solid surface. Tap it. And then again on the other side, tap, tap. There. Now you can just hand test it, make sure everything feels super solid in there. Looks pretty good to me. Feels good. Feels solid. A critical point here is to make sure and check the placement of the stirrup, and just make sure the stirrup is in that notch in the front of the bow irons. Because if it's not, well, you'd probably know by now anyway, because there wouldn't be enough room really to put these to put the wedges in. So that's all pretty good, and now you're essentially ready to string the prod again and ready to shoot. So that's the process. So there we have it. That is the process of popping on the bow irons and securing everything together. And that is something that really can be used for any crossbow that's using bow irons. And again, in this case, I'm using the medieval crossbow kit, Mark II. Which is now available for sale on the website. So have a look at that. I'll put the link in the description, as well as, if I can figure it out, up here or wherever. And that's it for today. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.